meetings have always been open to the public, pretty much spread by word of mouth. And just thank you and hope that you can go home feeling that you've learned something. Joe, as far as you're concerned, we had talked about some signs for our lawns. Do you know where that might be?
That's a Cabot thing. Bill's currently in Pittsburgh right now. I'm actually gonna see him tomorrow. I'm going out there, do some stuff. I'll do a follow on that. See who's it.
Okay.
For sure.
And at the last meeting, we were looking to maybe have someone here that could address how to read the royalty checks.
Yep.
And so you have a response for that.
Yeah, I talked to Dennis, phone and email. What's going on with Cabot is that because royalty checks are so, it's very individual, they want to come and do an overall presentation on it. Everyone's going to get confused. Everyone's very different. They had mailed out a packet to everyone about the post-production costs. So if you receive that, that's the information in there. I also then got from Janice contact information for the Houston office where you can find out more information. It's an email. I have an email, I have an address, and I have a telephone number with instructions on how to, what number to hit afterwards. And I printed off a bunch, but I couldn't find my scissors, so I have 3 of them, but I'll leave it up here if you guys want to just come up, write down the information. Yeah, I can work on that while we're doing it. But that's where we're at with that. If you want information on it, that's how you're going to have to go about getting it for now. I wish I could be more help, but that's what I was hoping to happen.
Well, and that was my thought, that everybody is an individual.
I mean, that'd be crazy for them to come in and try to accomplish that without asking more people, in my opinion. So that's where we're at with the royalty checks. I was, however, able to get Brian Oram to come out, independent of the industry, water specialist, I would say. Yeah, why don't we do that? Brian's going to introduce himself, and we'll have a presentation for us.
Well, thank you for coming, Oram. We really appreciate that. And our meetings here are a result of my contacts with Farm Bureau and talking with somebody from Franklin Township at Harvard Fair Time. And they were very, very positive about the meetings over there, and they told me that they had had you and great presentation.
Try to be right in the middle of all issues. Will the video, you're going to advance for me, the slide? No, you're going to advance.
Oh, yeah, I got it. I know you're looking at
the range I can walk.
half the whiteboard. That's cool.
Is that half the whiteboard?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Half the whiteboard.
How does that work for everybody else?
Can everybody see the screen here?
Yeah, and everybody else.
Yeah.
Is that all right with everybody else? But I can go over to half the whiteboard?
Yeah, it's the center of the room. Should be fine.
Is that okay for you? No. Hi, well thanks for having me up here. My name's Brian Oram. I was born and raised in the Wyoming Valley. I grew up playing on old coal mines, mine spoil land. Things I used to do as a kid is a street would flood because all the stormwater, and I'd be out there in my inner tube playing. I then went to school, and I didn't find out until I got into college that I was actually playing in raw sewage because it was actually the storm sewers backing up. And then
They're still here.
They're still there. It's Grant, Wilkes-Barre, 2 main places. When I do my talks on this, I really try to be really fair and balanced on this issue. And my take on it is a little different than most, I think. The title I've used, and I'm sorry if everybody can see that if I stand maybe around here. I'm not blocking anybody. It's called Getting the Waters Tested in the Marcellus Shale Faster. And I use that phrase because it's not just the Marcellus Shale is the biggest problem in the world we have. It's just one other thing on top of all the other things that we've created. We have problems with septic systems. We have problems with agricultural waste. If you're down in Wilkes-Barre, you have problems with storm sewers. You have all landfills. You have these hosts of things that add another layer to the cake. All right, and Marcellus shale is just one of those things to add to the cake. You know, so we have, and in doing so, we have to protect our water resources, where we use for recreation, drinking, the environment that we enjoy, and that's a luxury. We have our old issues. That's a photo of as I was driving through beautiful Susquehanna County about 4 years ago. You know, beautiful rolling hills, you know, open fields because of timber harvesting, etc. And here we find this beautiful dump in the middle of Susquehanna County that I didn't know was there. The top, the old issues, we can't forget those. And then the new issue, you know, the Marcellus shale development. That's a shot of the drilling down the well in Luzerne County by Ken, natural gas. And finally, more importantly, it is a statewide issue, and then down at the bottom we see community. And I taught at Wilkes University for 23 years, and really the future's our kids. So it's all about our kids, our decisions we make now are in part not just about us, but also our future. So again, that's why I like to call it working as a community. Yes?
Your shoulders are awful broad.
I didn't play football. I never lifted or wrestled. I did spot powerlifters.
If you slid over by that chair, we'd be able to sit.
Right here? Now I'm trying to stay around here. Or over there, better?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Perfect.
Right like this? Okay. Go to the next slide. Again, when I left Wilkes University, there was a couple requirements my wife gave. That's in focus pretty much for everyone. I know it's on an angle. She required me to put 2 slides in. It promotes my business. So I reluctantly do that. We own the company together. She's my boss, and I'm the lead professional. So what you have up there is just a presentation I just did in Corey, PA on the right. And a great photo I just came across on the bottom I shot recently. It's a person who said, hey, their water quality was fine. They had no problems. And see the 2 bottles on the left? That's their water coming out of their tap. And all I did was add a little chlorine to their water. And that's what it did to it. Hey, my water's fine. It looks clear, tastes fine. But there's stuff in it. And that's the legacy. And for 23 years prior to Marcellus shale, I spent my time just getting private well owners to test their well. Because the mentality was, it's clear, tastes great, doesn't smell bad, I have no problem. And let's be honest, we have some baseline problems in Pennsylvania. Next. What I really enjoy, next slide, just skip over, these are all my professional services. What I really enjoy the most is what I fund. My company funds the Water Resource Center. That what pays me to come here. I don't get any compensation for anyone to come here other than me to do these things. On that program, we do education outreach. I have everything I know about drinking water on that website that you guys can go to and steal and use to answer your questions, because my goal is not talk to anyone. So if you have a problem, go to my web portal and you can find the answer. We also do outreach programs like this for kids. We do facilitate baseline testing, but also informational water testing for screening. So you can have a kit mailed to your house, not certified in terms of a third-party baseline, but hey, if you want to see if a change occurred, so rather than spending $1,000 or $1,500, you can spend a couple hundred and get it checked yourself. If you ever need help with any results, it doesn't have to be me collecting it. Give me a call, send me a copy of it. I'll send you a form to fill out that says I can look at it and get back to you, and I'll do it for free. Happy to do that. Next slide. This is the target audience, but also hit the slide. But I don't want to forget the other target audience, as I mentioned before, the environment and our kids. Right? We all think about all the other audience, but we sometimes forget those. Next. Just some places so you can understand some things I've been involved in. I've been on multiple drilling sites. I don't have any master service agreements with any gas company. I've either led tours on sites or actually been invited to sites to look at the process. That was a tour I was on for Chesapeake during a big change. That was the first time I ever got to see that. And finally on the left, I was actually invited out with EPA sampling up in Dimmock with a 5-person team there. That was interesting. Took them 5 hours to sample one well. I wish I had the budget for that. Next. Current work, the things I'm working on now is definitely private homeowner outreach. We have a web survey we do for Pennsylvania and nationwide. We are partnering with another group that's looking to help get stories from private well owners. So if they think they have an issue or a problem, they can submit their information, and we kind of guide them through, give them suggestions on what to test for, or what might be causing some issues. And then finally, we came out with a new booklet, which you all have a copy of. The girl on the booklet is my youngest daughter, Samantha. Next. All right, when I look at this, you know, it started off in 2009 or 2008. You know, you had this, somehow you had to pick. You know, is it Marcellus shale or clean water? And for me, that's not the argument, and it's a bad way to look at it. So next. You know, I don't believe in picking sides. It's a bad mindset to use, and next. You know, we all live downstream, right? Whatever you do on your property upstream affects people downgrading, and we're all downgrading from someone. So again, looking at this as a community. Next, just to let you know, I'm a long-haired Republican. I believe in landowners' rights. I believe in paying my fair share of taxes, etc. One thing I'm a really big thing against, I hate using the word frack or whatever form, because really what it was, it came out of, go ahead. You know, me as a youth, I used to watch Battlestar Galactica. I don't know how many people saw that show. Not many, okay? But it was a war between man and machine. You know, and now what do we got going on now? Hit, next. Really, war, the battle, and next. Really, you know, really the word is hydro-fracking. That's what I tend to use. I try not to use this slang. Next. And I put this slide up because we're not alone. You know, this is a landowners group. I talk to all groups. I go anywhere I'm invited. My talks are almost always the same. Maybe a slight spin a little bit depending on the group and the group's interest, but we're not alone. So, you know, you as landowners that own property, that have mineral rights, you know, there are other people across the country that are going through the same things you're going through, and more importantly, there's some that aren't. They don't own the subsurface rights. They live on the property, they don't have the ability to stay. So we might not be all alone, but the issues are the same, right? Hey, they're going by my road, dust on my house, or more extreme, but they're also different. So it's kind of an interesting issue right now when you look at it across the country. Thank you. Next. Well, I want to give you a little bit of perspective of what the Marcellus shale is. Marcellus shale is an old marine deposit. So at one point, the land at the surface was below the ocean. All right? Below the ocean. And the ocean was where? That over here. Okay, it wasn't over there, it was over here. And what was here was a large mountain chain the size of the Himalayas. That mountain chain contained metamorphic igneous rocks that has lots of trace metals and radioactivity in it. The nature of the Marcellus shale is it's a shale and a clay deposit that grabs that stuff. So it does contain, is considered a norm, a naturally occurring radioactive material, but most of that radioactivity stays bonded to the cuttings that come out of the hole. One of the issues in New York is in New York, when there was an article that came out from the university there, they brought up that issue for New York as a big issue because New York wasn't testing the cuttings for that radioactivity. It's highly variable. Pennsylvania's been doing that. So when you look at that as an issue, there are some things coming out looking at managing brine water by using road salt, converting it to road salt, and looking at trying to do beneficial use of cuttings. There's definitely some issues there to make sure you get those materials tested. Next. My presentation today will try to cover these things. Next. You know, a little bit more. I'm going to try to focus on water quality change, what's baseline testing, what are some of the critical issues. Because how many people have gone through and had either on their own or somebody else paid for a baseline sampling at your house? Okay, great. For those that don't have it done and you went to a Penn State talk and Penn State said wait till 6 months before they get there, that's wrong. Get it done now. That's the best answer. And then finally working as a community. Next. Before Marcellus shale, what do we know? And this is one big problem. There was not many people in the room besides me and maybe a few others that read scientific journals. Scientific journals back in 1996 came out and said that 70% of private wells produce water that you can drink. That violated the drinking water standard. Primary. That means it make you sick. Not that it looked funny, you know, smelled bad, but it make you sick. Did anybody tell any of you? No. I worked for 23 years at Wilkes University. During that period of time, I did testing throughout the world, actually. We had samples coming in. We did about, on the average, a few hundred water samples per month from all throughout the world, including, and plus the US. For the US, we found that anywhere from 30 to 50% of private wells did not meet drinking water standards because of an acute problem. There was something wrong already with their water, that people didn't know about it. They didn't know about it because why? It looked clear, right? Didn't stink. There was no reason to suspect there was a problem. Yes. And that was confirmed by Penn State. Now, one of the things I have been working on since 2009 is called the Citizen Groundwater Database, a private well owner that's done baseline testing. Either they paid for it and it's gone through chain of custody certified testing, or they've got it from a gas company that went through this same process, can submit the data to us. We'll look at it for free. We'll give you back a review of that data, and if you decide to, then we can release it to the database. When we release it to the database, we don't include your name, address, phone number, or any way to contact you. It's just about the data. We do include a zip code, so we can tie it to some geology. And from that data, this is what we found. So far, baseline data in Pennsylvania, pre-drilling, half of the wells meet drinking water standards. The other half don't. And this is about the breakdown. Iron and manganese issues, sediment and gases already, corrosion issues, and then finally bacteria. And the big one is bacteria next. So how do we know that? And again, that slide is next. Citizen database, next. You know, how do you go do that? Getting the sample, getting the stuff into getting the samples located, getting a rough position. I do baseline testing. Is the review free? Absolutely. Next. This is what they include, the guidelines. If somebody's interested in that, there's a one sheet there. You have the option, you can fill that out, send me a copy of the data. Again, send it, say, hey, no, I just want a free review, or no, I'd like a free review and send it to the database. Your choice, not required. Next. This is what we found. The far left, about 49% of the private well owners had total coliform problem. Now I go to talks, and I hear people saying, it's just total coliform. You know, that's not bad. You know, well, wait a second. What total coliform means? If I can get total coliform in your water, guess what else I can get in your water? Sodium, chloride, strontium, barium, dissolved gases, and everything else. All right? That means there's a weakness, either in where the well is located or how it was constructed, that's could facilitate contamination. I call it, when I do a presentation for the oil and gas industry at their conference a few years ago, I said, you guys are collecting all this data, you are finding the wells in your community that are vulnerable to impact. Why in heck, trying to edit myself because it's on tape, why in heck are we drilling right 100 feet away from these things? Or, if you're going to drill 100 feet or 300 feet away from these things, why don't you go in there and fix it? Find out what's making that well vulnerable to impact or potential impact and change it. When I talk to landowners like you, I say the same thing. You got your baseline testing back, and you have an issue and you have coliform bacteria. I strongly suggest you do something to make it less vulnerable to impact. Not that expensive, but you can do it. The next issues are the water's corrosive, that could leach iron and manganese, lead, copper out of the piping of your house. Iron and manganese, how many people have red, black water occasionally? Yes, a little bit, no, occasionally. It's only about 8%, so it's not everybody. The thing that was really strange was phthalates. It's an organic, comes from plasticizers, and we think it's the black coil pipe that's hung in the well, especially if there's a bacterial problem. Arsenic, about 8% of the wells had problems with arsenic in it, above a drinking water limit. Again, you wouldn't know that because the water's clear. And finally, when I hit the button, the thing that was really cool was this section over here. Now these are all wells that were collected in a region where no natural gas development has ever occurred, in this slide. When they did check the Marcellus Shale in this region, there was no gas available, actually none, almost virtually none in the Catskill Formation above it, and no commercial gas in the Marcellus. But I have in the data set anywhere from 1 to 5% of the wells that if you just gave me the data and looked at it, I'd look at you and say, hey, I think there's an impact. Because those wells are impacted by saline water. Next. Saline water will fingerprint like a Marcellus Shale impact. So right now, what do we find out is that pre-drilling Marcellus Shale wells, somewhere between 1 and 5% of private wells already have a saline water impact that look like they're impacted by Marcellus Shale. Again, the other reason for baseline testing. Because not only are those vulnerable those wells vulnerable impact from below, right, because they're more connected in the shallower ones. The other thing that says is those wells can actually influence the other wells around it. And I actually have a case of that in Lake Erie, where I have one private well, no natural gas development, one private well, too deep, in the saline water, actually causing the neighbor's well to be contaminated. I'll show you a graph. Next. All right. Some other issues are poor emissions in construction as we go through. This is we were working on draining a hot water heater. You know, fixing the problem into a house. Hey, I have a problem. My water gets dirty. It has a funny smell. Went out there and did some testing and found out we had some bacteria growing in the hot water heater, creating that problem. Flushed that out. While we were flushing, we could actually see slime coming out of that heater. Next. You know, again, private wells aren't regulated in general by anybody. Most townships. Next. You know, some photos I found of private wells. That's a private well about 6 feet. The top of that's below ground with a pond behind it. We had to pump the water out of that pit when we were getting to that well. Again, that's not everybody's well, right? You know, that's some people's wells. Next. Sorry for the photo is kind of blurry. Right? That's a well in a pit. The water level is above the top of the well. The water level actually goes down through into the well. So these are all the other issues that contribute to water quality issues in the community. Next. This is what I found within 100 feet of a private well. That's a quarry just west of Dimmock. Next. Believe it or not, I actually called. The people in that house were sick. They had diarrhea, didn't know why. Well, again, their well is 100 feet from that. They didn't know why. Next. This was that photo in Susquehanna County. Believe it or not, about 200 feet away, there's actually a flowing artesian well that says free artesian well water. You know, next. Really? Really want to drink that? Next. So one of the things I come up here to do is, you know, like I said, the community solution is part of this issue. Is that we need to have some private well construction standards. You know, to make sure a private well is properly constructed in place. And more importantly, I would love to see a program that would help fix private wells. So if somebody did baseline testing and had a problem, they can go somewhere and say, hey, I have a problem with my well, I need it fixed. The casing's cracked. Somebody put PVC casing in when they drilled this well. There's no standards. I didn't know. My well is acting like a pinprick into the aquifer and it's leaking contamination on a daily basis. I think it should be fixed. And there's money out there that potentially could fix that if we scream and ask for it enough. Next. Water can turn purple or pink. This happens to be a nice pink color. The cause of that is manganese for this particular well. That's how it actually came out of the well. Next. Talk about how these contaminants get in. So a big problem with me is well construction. I talked about there. So we have old wells that hit next. So we can have movement along places where the wells aren't grouted. And next. So we can see these contaminants getting into the formation. So it could be old wells could be part of the problem, plus surface spills and releases from underlying structures, wherever they might be. Leaky tanks, fractured rock, are all pathways here. And so, you know, since this is a landowners group related to natural gas development, you know, my big thing is, you know, talk to the local company that's doing the work. Make sure they're, you know, try to encourage them to use self-contained structures, spill prevention plans. That's something that's kind of just new. Requiring liners has been new for some companies. Some companies have been doing that for a while. Other ones are just coming into that. But encouraging those measures. Next. When we talk about construction, one of the biggest issues is next. I apologize that it has to be done that way. My clicker broke all the way through it. Probably have to go back one. Thank you. Right there, this is the issue of well construction and placement. So we got a properly constructed well. You know, again, when we talk about a properly constructed well, it's getting the water from the confined aquifer. It's not intermixing water or short-circuiting it. We look to the right, we see two wells, right? One shallow, relatively shallow, one deep. Because of how they're constructed, it allows mixing between the aquifers. So that water that's a few years old can get right into a formation that's hundreds of years old. It short-circuits it, right? Because you might say, hey, I got a 300-foot well. Well, how deep is your casing? 20 feet. So anything that's in the formation 20 feet down is going where? Right? And finally, we have wells that are too deep that actually tap the saline aquifer. These are water wells that are going to have problems of arsenic, barium, strontium, methane, etc. That can also infect or impact those shallow wells that aren't into that formation. Next. This is the depiction of that. This is actually a case I have. The well on the left is actually my second grade school teacher's well in the Lake Erie area. Her well is too deep into the saline aquifer that's in the yellow. When she pumps her well hit next, the water level drops her in the well and the well recovers. It brings up the saline water, right? Does that make sense? Brings that saline water back up, and then it migrates out to the adjacent private well. Private well owner here, hey, I never had this in my water before. You know, the only way that we could find out what was going on, I like working as a community, talking to each other about things. You know, which is why, like again, we talked about that citizen database and why we do it. Next. Other things to keep in mind on wells is next. Keep going. One more. All right, right here is well location. So you might have a highly productive well on a lot of fracture zones in a valley structure. Depending on how deep it is, that well could be a well that naturally produces lots of methane. All right, if it's too deep. As opposed to you might have a shallow well on the edge of that valley structure, not far enough down near a fracture, that's not going to have that same water quality. So if you ever heard everybody and it says, hey, my water quality is something wrong, and everybody looks around at all the neighbors and says, hey, we don't have a problem. It must be you. No, never think that. Because they could be the ones that, based on how deep their well is, right, and where they're at, they could be the red flag for the community. So again, working as a community. I don't judge anybody. You know, I have a little bit of a Catholic upbringing. Balance that with a Buddhist. Next. And then finally, during the drilling process of any well, okay, either a drinking water well or a Marcellus shale well, we can have what's called loss of circulation. So what this slide is two wells. One's a properly constructed private well that's deeper, and the next one's a poorly constructed private well that doesn't have enough casing, and they're going to be drilling a Marcellus shale well. And we're going to first see the drilling of it with the construction standards that were done in 2009. So we start seeing that go. We put conduit casing in, they start drilling down, and you see the things moving because we have the circulation back up to a lined pit, right? See the arrows, that's bringing the mud up. We see the little red arrows going in. But as you notice that some of the stuff, because some of the stuff isn't going all the way back to the top, it's coming out the side. Okay? And what that is that there's shallow fracture zones. So if you're trying to get that mud to come out the top, it doesn't all come out the top. Sometimes it can go back in. Right? So what we have is we have a loss of circulation. So theoretically, I apologize for moving around. Theoretically, if everything was fine, we'd be drilling down and that mud that's pumped down the casing would come back up the sides and out into the lined pit. Not all of that occurs. Sometimes we lose circulation, it goes into the formation. What well gets impacted? A shallow, poorly constructed private well gets impacted first. Well, what we can do is we can change that. Next. So first thing that changed, you started seeing companies do what? Switch over to, when they're getting rid of the lined pits from mud, going to self-contained drilling, managing the cuttings, putting liners on the site. The next change you saw was what? Hit button. Casing, right? So if we case off that zone more, where that mud came off the side, we help manage that. But in actuality, if we still leave that poorly constructed private well there, and don't do anything about it, that's still a vulnerability. Next. And if you don't think sediment naturally moves 80 to 100 feet, just do a close-up one more. This is the quarry, West of Dimmock. I'm 80 feet down, and that's soil moving along a fracture. Right now. Next. So the actual design of it is switching over to multiple casings. One of the things that changed in Pennsylvania, hit the next one, was that initially there was an option in coal country to use a coal casing. By the way, for the record, a color PDF version of this will be on my website that you can take and put it wherever you want. You know, that way. It'll be each slide will be its own page. So it won't be, 5 pages color, so you can actually look at it. So they added that additional casing. It used to be called the cold casing, so you're now seeing that being used in PA more regularly. Next. One place, if you see the horizontal legs, one portion that's still a bit of vulnerability is right above the kickoff point. The kickoff point is where that bend is, right in the drilling leg. Right above that, some drillers, when they cement, don't bring the cement all the way back up into the inside of casing. If possible, I strongly recommend that. We don't want to have an uncemented zone. I know it's hard because I'm not pointing to it. Okay. Next. And finally, we do have cement leaks. So one of the things that's going on is, one of the big changes in the law is not only requiring, well, in New York, I'm thankful they did it for all well sites. They use cement bond logs. The new change in Pennsylvania will actually do cement bond logging test on the well pad. And then every 5 years they do an analysis. Is it enough? No, I prefer the New York standards. But again, that's a discussion with the gas companies, that you guys may be able to have a change on your local level, where it might take too long to have on the state level as landowners. Thanks. Next. Again, that's the ideal. Multiple casings. And again, one of the things I'm a big fan of is, I love to do file reviews. I hate to drive to Harrisburg to do them. So I'd like to encourage, if possible, if you can have a discussion with the gas companies to keep some portion of the information about how they construct the wells available for review. Not where your private well is, but some of the basics, so it's there available for you. Next. Finally, when we look at methane gas migration, this is a slide before any drilling. All right, so what we have here is the blue line or green line is this freshwater aquifer at the top of the water table. So we have a private well there. We have another water table called a saline water table, and that's really highly variable. It could be 300, 600 feet, 800 feet. It's not a straight well. So we have wells under that. Below that, we have the Casco Formation and other formations that do contain their own gas, thermogenic gas. And so I made that red. The dot's red. That is fractures, and that's how the gas would move, would be along fractured pathways. And then we finally go down in the black zone, that's the black shale, and that's the Marcellus shale gas. Now the Marcellus shale gas has, over millions of years, leaked up to the Casco Formation, right? That happens. It takes millions of years for that to occur, but some of it's there. So we could have baseline testing prior to any drilling, have wells like at Salt Spring, would have background levels of methane extremely high. And how many people have been to Salt Spring? How many people ever lit the spring on fire? That is very cool. I love doing that. Took a bunch of kids there. They had a ball doing that. But now when we drill the Marcellus shale wells, go ahead, just hit the button. Hopefully it'll take us through a drilling. We'll drill down. And apologies for a little delay in casing placement. So the casing's going in on those holes, cement. What's not a requirement in state law is, see that little zone right there where I have the arrows? Mm-hmm. Not all drillers cement that zone all the way back in the casing. And for me, that's an issue. I wish it was a requirement, because what happens, the weakest part of a cement job is the bottom. Right, that's where it separates from the casing. Right, how many people poured cement? You pour cement, where does it separate first? On the edge, right? Contracts a little bit. So my preference is that, if possible, to cement all the way up into one of the inner strings. Because if you leave that zone there, that's where we can have overpressurization. And the gas that we see coming out is red. It's not blue. Because what the gas that's migrating is the gas from the Catskill. So you can have methane gas migration and be gas from the Marcellus shale. Not from the Marcellus shale, but from the Casco Formation, tied to natural gas development. So it's important when you do your baseline testing, again, every one is different, is to do the methane, ethane, propane, in the analysis. Because that allows you to look at that and say, hey, is this thermogenic gas, biogenic gas? And if it's really high, then you can go out and get additional tests done to give you a better idea of where it might be coming from. All right, so if you really have some high values, I'd say probably over 7, over 7, I'd probably consider doing that isobag analysis. I talk about that in the book. Next. So when I look at Marcellus shale and private wells, I don't think it's a one-to-one thing, and I kind of like to throw other private wells in the problem. And I look at it this way. It's not a Marcellus Shale issue, it's a this issue. Everything's on the table for me. I think we need to look at, we're looking at protecting groundwater. We talk about everything. We talk about, how we're managing stormwater, septic, sewage, making a change in our community, how we do things. Next. I put this up there, and I want to make sure it's clear. No claim against any of the people and what the issues they have. But one of the things I found that I did next is I took the clean water and put it in a container and checked for iron bacteria. And I get the same appearance. Now, next. About 50% of the time when I have a problem with bacteria, iron and manganese, it's caused by a bacteria. Now, if you have a methane issue, you also get increased iron levels of iron and manganese. But I had multiple places I've been where I didn't have high methane, but I had this problem. These are all examples of that. These are all wells where the water coming out of the water, I put the water in here clear, and in 3 days it turned this color. This is caused by bacteria. Next. Again, if you have your baseline testing done and you have a bacterial problem, and you have an iron manganese hit and an occasional odor, and you check your back your toilet and it feels slimy, you have these people. Now, as a private well owner, the reason I say that is that this can cause intermittent water quality issues for you. Okay? This may be a time all of a sudden the water turns red, right, or black. Nothing happened other than these things going crazy. You need to address that issue. Because the people working for the gas companies also know about this problem, and what they'll say is come back and go, oh, what's this? Honest. All right? But you need to go and do that extra step and check to make sure you don't have this problem if you do have a higher manganese level. That's part of what I do and when I look at your data. Next. I got called down and I was told the water had a purple color. I love to see purple colors. Any kind of color in water. I've seen all different colors of water. Green, blue, purple is neat. Went out there and did that analysis, collected the samples. By the way, I paid for it all. I didn't ask anything from the homeowner. This was in 2011. Let's look at the data. Iron-related bacterial count. 140,000 colonies per mil. Okay, per 1 mil. The drinking water standard for total coliform bacteria is 1 colony per 100 mils. Okay? Aluminum exceeds the drinking water standard. Iron well exceeds the drinking water standard. Manganese is 100 times the drinking water standard. Lead exceeds the drinking water standard. Methane is not present at all. Okay? The cause of the iron bacteria. What was cool about this is the water coming out of the well didn't come out purple. The water that came out of the far end of the distribution system did. And it was actually regrowing in the distribution system, and the purple water was in a section of it. Okay? The dead end section that didn't get used much. Shock disinfected that hole. Next. Private wells. Hey, I went from this nice clear water to now. This is an example of this for here. Next. Before, hey, I got a call from a homeowner. Went up, did the water quality, we evaluate, and evaluation is important. I do not assume anything. When I do work, I evaluate everything. I don't care who did it, why it happened. I don't know anything about that. I go there and see based on the facts I see. We had evidence of corrosion in this well. We had very low levels of chloride, barium, methane low. Other indicators of saline water were very low. But we had high iron, manganese. We shock disinfected that hole, cleaned it out. The problem was the iron bacteria. This person at this well had a tendency to travel for months at a time. In this time, he was away for 5 months. Came back. Water was like this. It took me 3 shock disinfections of this hole at a concentration of almost 1,000 milligrams per liter of chlorine to kill this, because it grows as a slime coating. You can't just pour Clorox down, like some of the well drillers tell you, hey, bacteria hump, just pour some Clorox down, pump it out, you're okay. That doesn't fix this. Next. Methane's been a long history in this area. You know, we didn't really know about it unless you had high concentrations of it, because otherwise it doesn't have an odor. It's colorless. Kind of looks like that on the left, right? Until you light it. Next. You know, let's be honest, we all produce a little methane. Some a little bit more than others. Yeah, that's the point. Get a little laugh. I can't see my clocks right along. And next. You know, we have naturally occurring methane, so we got wetlands producing methane, biogenic gas. Next, just hit the button, you'll see that. We have landfills, old landfills. And this is a point when you're having someone hire someone to do your baseline testing, they need to know this. And you know what, if they don't ask you this stuff, don't hire them. You know, if they just say, yes, you're going to do a Penn State Tier 3, I'll be out tomorrow. That's not the consultant you want. All right? When you do your baseline testing at your house, what do you got there? Hey, I have an old farm. My neighbor had an old gas station. We used to do this. Because the baseline test should be done to protect you against everything. And your history, not just one industry. Next. So you go, landfill, lake sediments, next. We also have gas coming from the non-Marcellus shale formations. And that's a mixture of type that's mostly thermogenic, created by heat and pressure. Whereas those other gases, the landfill, wetland, and lake, is biogenic, created by bacteria. Next. There are those pathways. Next. So again, and then finally, that left over about old oil and gas wells, but sorry, I left it in there for my presentation out in Western PA. So again, this is a sample of from a quarry in Dimmock that I was working. We actually can see organic materials and organic muds in the rock in the Catskill Formation. This is the organic source for that thermogenic methane gas. Next. The other thing to keep in mind, just click it until, keep going. Go right on 200. When you see data that says the methane level is above 28, all that means is that the water coming from that borehole is not in equilibrium with the atmosphere. Okay, so let me just go over this. If I have water saturated with methane, the concentration of methane in that water is 28 to 32. 200 feet down, that same water has 192 milligrams per liter of methane in it. Right? Because it's under pressure. The weight of the water and temperature allows more methane to be in solution. As we take that pressure off, it outgasses, and what happens at the top of the well? You get the bubbles, right? What's that? Because of the methane outgassing. So when you look at data, if you ever see data that your methane level is above 28, oh my gosh, I'm way above. That means that you're pulling in that water, that pump is pulling in that water at a very high concentration and it can't outgas. And quick enough to get to equilibrium with the atmosphere. Not something to be extra worried about because the levels are high. You can't manage that by raising the pump level. Change that. And some of the things that we're working on, and the one website I have is other things that can be done besides treatment to manage methane on a well. Next. Background level of methane in the area. I put this up, you'll have it. Highly variable. I've been to places where one gentleman had 2 wells on the property, one 300 feet deep, one 20 feet apart. The level at the well at 300 feet was not detect. The one at 500 feet deep was 7 milligrams per liter. Highly variable. So just because of a vertical difference of 200 feet, we have 7 milligrams per liter difference. We have temporal variation, changes over time going on. And finally, we have change while you're pumping your well. Next, so the water coming out of the well on the left, if you took the sample, prior to really any excessive pumping, high water level, that keeps the methane trapped in the rock formation. You start drawing that water down and lower the pressure, what happens? Next. That's when it starts outgassing, right? Does that make sense? Right? If I took 2 water lines, one 100 psi and one 50, and connected them, what's going to happen to the water? It's going to go from the 100 to 50. It's going to keep that 50 down. But if all of a sudden I took that 100 psi water line and I put 750 people flushing toilets simultaneously and the pressure drops to 25, what's going to happen to the water? It's going to go up. Same thing happens here. Next. Methane levels change with time. You can use this data as you want. If you're doing your own baseline testing, go sample when it's low, right? when it's naturally gonna be low. So, hey, I go out there when the ground's not saturated, not frozen, and the methane can escape, it's not gonna be high in my water. That's what I'm gonna sample. But there is a temporal variation in this, how it occurs. Next, this is an example of that, where you have huge methane fluctuations, how they change seasonally. That's about 2 years worth of data. The other thing important about that data, when you see methane spikes next, you also see, this is a plot of aluminum. So when the methane spikes, so does aluminum, because we create corrosion issue. Or we have a solubility change, where aluminum can now come out of the rock. Next. Sorry, it's a little long. When I look at this, and the key things is, we have natural pathways and artificial pathways for methane gas migration. Up in this area, we have both thermogenic gas, and that's created by what? Heat and pressure, right? Thermogenic gas, is that found near the surface or at depth? Down deep, typically. Migrates up along fractures over millions of years, unless we create an artificial pathway. Biogenic gas, what's that created by?
Bacteria.
Bacteria. Typically shallow. You know, what would be one place where we might create biogenic gas? No, sorry. I have to do that. It's
Stagnant water.
long drive to get here. What?
Stagnant
Wetlands.
water.
Yes. Right. So the way I look at this is, what did we learn? There was baseline testing. When you do baseline testing, the baseline testing gives us an idea about two types of wells. One is a well that has bacteria that's highly vulnerable and potentially vulnerable to impact from near surface activities, right? Because it has bacteria. Bacteria normally only live outside of a host for about 90 days or so. We have other wells that are deep. Those wells have methane already occurring, already influence the saline aquifer, so these two different kind of wells. Shallow wells that are vulnerable to bacteria, hopefully we can fix those, but they're the ones that are going to be vulnerable to spills, right? While we're drilling, loss of circulation. The ones that are deep near saline water, they're going to be vulnerable to if there's ever enough pressure created to cause a push. Or they're going to affect the private wells in the community. So if you want to be, there's a lot of townships I talk to that want to do their own monitoring program. They want to try to figure out which wells to monitor. And I say, well, talk to people, see if you can find out where those wells are, and they're great places to monitor. And the best place to monitor around here would be a well that has high methane already and a saline water fingerprint. Because that's a well that's directly connected to that saline aquifer that's closer to the Marcellus Shale, if you're looking at that impact. Next, baseline testing, some parameters, we'll go over that real quick. One point I want to bring up here is that when people tell you what baseline testing to do, should we be doing the same baseline test if your house is near one of those things? Right? If you're near the salt spring and we know that there's high levels of methane in saline water, you know, should we do the same test as if you're near the quarry? No, I don't think so. Or you're near that old mixed hazard waste site? Next. When we look at things, it also depends on the operation. The blue graph on the left is flowback water. The purple is production water. So if we're in an area where they talk about deep well injection, you know, on the site, that's production brine. That's highly concentrated material to be worried about. So, and then so if you were having that with a deep well that already had a saline water fingerprint, you want to be worried about those particular parameters. Next. I'll just hit that button until everything fills in. When Penn State did their work on parameters, we do keep going. It takes a while. There, stop there. I provided this so you have it. You know, things they missed back in 2000, bromide, that should have been added to the list a long time ago. Took them $20,000 study or whatever that was to recommend it. There's tons of other parameters to add in to a baseline test. In part, what baseline testing you do is depends on what you have at your house, your budget, and what's going around, what you perceive to go around in the future. One thing we do a lot of in baseline testing, we check for BTACs, right? Benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, xylene, right? Gas, inorganics. But they're the concentrations of where the arrows point to benzene and toluene in flowback water. But what we don't test for next, that's glycols. We don't test for that at all. Wouldn't that be a great thing to test for? I mean, if you're looking at the potential impact for natural gas development, shouldn't we be testing for glycols? We're testing for BTACs. And finally, if you want to test for other organics that might be higher than BTACs, there would be naphthalene and acetone and maybe aldehydes. Again, depending on your budget. Next. Finally, the reason why glycols are a big thing is that I'm a big believer in alternative energy. I funded 2 alternative energy expos. I'm actually a licensed geothermal installer. I'm the chair of a nonprofit that pushes biomass energy, using switchgrass. Next, we install geothermal wells in the ground for heating and cooling. There are no construction standards for those either. Next, they can release and lose glycols. Next, they also can release aluminum silicates. I worked on a couple wells where private wells have been impacted by those. So again, if you have, the question should be asked, what is being used? Are you using heat pumps like this for heating and cooling your home or your neighbors? Next. The last thing I'll probably end here is when we're looking at purging a well, and I think this is one of the reasons why there are so many variations in water quality data, is this. So what was happening is the bottom is time. We turn the water on, right, coming out of the spigot. And the yellow line, the blue line, and the purple line, we're measuring water quality in real time in the field. And what we see is over time, those levels in this particular case kind of went down, dropped, and then kind of leveled off. Is that a fair statement for those three? Okay. And the reason why that is, when you turn the water on in your well, what first comes out? Well, the water that's in the pipe, then the water that's sitting in the well casing, and then after a little while, we start getting water from the formation itself. That all makes sense. What was really cool was that we then grabbed samples and tested for methane. What's the methane level do? It goes up. And then it finally levels off. So how many people hit next? How many people normally, when you use your well, let it run for 45 minutes? No. I never had a problem. Well, yeah, because when we do this kind of baseline testing now, it's not the normal kind of testing that's done for real estate transactions. We don't care about the water that's in your pipes or the water coming in from the formation. We want to know what the water is in the aquifer. All right? When you had your real estate transfer your house, the person was there maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes at most with the sample. Hopefully the people doing baseline testing up here are out there long enough to get that, what's coming from the aquifer. I've talked to a lot of homeowners where they weren't. Some companies had really detailed sampling plans that were out there that long. Next. All right, so the methane increased with time. So I'm going to give you, these are my suggestions for baseline testing parameters for citizens. It's also in the book. Next. You'll have what the Marcellus Shale Coalition recommended. I have a blog post that tells them why, and I sent it to them, by the way, before I posted it, what they were missing. Next. Working as a community, I believe in this really, I hate the idea of fighting between citizens. We can all disagree about certain things, but you know what? We can all agree on certain things. We want our kids to grow up. We want them to have a place in this world. We want clean water, we want to have an economy. There are certain things we can agree on. Encouraging, education in the community. This is what I do here. Free the work I do. Getting people to get their water tested. If you were in a place with more central water authorities, working on a water authority, like source water protection. Fixing private wells. This is a big one, right? That person that has high levels of bacteria in the water, we all live downstream. I worked on a project in Massaro County. 35 people walked into the township building and said, our water is contaminated with bacteria. Fix it. Township went, not regulated in our county, not in our township, not our fault. Good luck. You right? But that's the fair answer. Well, that didn't work too long. It ended up me sitting on a panel, looking at all the data with people from DEP and then the senator or congressman. I don't know which one it was. To come to find out that the guy uphill of them had his water tested, had a bacterial problem. He fixed it by putting a treatment system in. treated his water. His water coming in the house is fine, no bacteria. You know how all the 35 other people got impacted? Because his well casing was cracked and his cesspool was impacting his well, right? We all live downstream. That's a solution that needs to be done at a community level. And there's money out there to do that with, if you ask for it. Or if you can get your township people who are getting a big check, say, hey, let's reinvest in this, you know, just like the River Basin Commission. You guys are getting heavy checks for all this water withdrawal. You're putting sensors on a stream, paying hydro-geologists to do something. How about sending that money back up here, and we'll do some groundwater protection and fix some private wells that are actually causing problems. So again, working as a community that way. Again, I encourage you to participate in a citizen database. And I encourage you, when you talk to gas companies, to try to get them to test all your water resources. The ponds, the streams, everything. Not every company does that, so I'm glad to hear that it's getting done. Next. Thanks. You got the booklets already. Normally they're $5, so have fun with them. My daughter's on them. That's Sam. Next. Anybody that needs continuing education credit, let me know. We'll send you a certificate for putting up with me this long. Next. That's all the events for me. Next. That's the end. One more. Hey! I just came back from Hawaii. I couldn't believe how expensive that was. My daughter has Crohn's, and we didn't find out till last year. She had Crohn's. She's 11. She was 10, and she was 40 pounds. And we found out she had Crohn's, and she's going for treatment every 2 months. And so she's up to 80 pounds. So we triple that. Thanks. Any questions? Yeah.
So can you say, based on your experience, that gas drilling near a water well, near homes, can cause contamination?
Sure.
In some way?
Yeah, natural gas drilling or private well drilling can impact a well. It's a function of the private well, and also how they drill and construct either the new well they're being drilled, natural gas well, or the private well. Either one of those can have an impact.
And do you know how? How are they impacting the
Well,
gas
the
drilling?
way that you can have impact is loss of circulation. That same process applies to both drilling private wells. I mean, I'm a licensed I'm a licensed well drilling PA. That doesn't mean much because it only takes $25 to get that license for a water well, for training. And so I've drilled lots of private wells and community water supply wells where I drilled a well, one location, and had the private well get dirty downhill, or blew mud out of somebody's house. Actually, the woman came out all drenched in mud with a towel because she was in the shower. So that was expensive. There's a couple hotels in there. But that happens, the loss of circulation. Now, with respect to natural gas wells, the thing that's minimizing that, you know, and I'll say minimizing because shit happens. First of all, was a change in law of multiple casing. You know, they came in the state of Pennsylvania, and the guidance they were given says, hey, all you need to do is drill the hole, go down about 2,000 feet, set one string casing, cement grout, you're done. Not the right answer. They were used to doing that because in other states, they have private well construction standards where at least the well's grouted. So you can't, it minimizes that loss of circulation issue. They don't have that here. That was the first one. When they also, the other change you see is how they drill that fresh water. So rather than using some heavy muds, they're either right now drilling that freshwater stream with air, very little water, to minimize that loss of circulation. We try to drill it dry. So that's how we're handling it. Finally, I've been an advocate for lining well pads since 2009 in Pennsylvania. That this didn't become a reality law as a requirement to have an impermeable barrier until 2011. That would be the other way.
So how much spillage is around on a pad?
Well, the thing is, it's not that that there's a lot. It's that there could be a lot. And you know, for me, when we talk about chemicals used, you know, back in 2009, my statement on chemicals, I'm not so much worried about the hydrofracking injecting the chemicals down in diluted form. I'm really worried about the concentrated chemicals driving through the community on the back of a truck, on icy roads, that they're just spilled.
That's a
Or
piece.
at that point, there's a release on site. I'm more worried about that. Let's get, that definitely has to be solved. So in places where, in Luzerne County, so when I talked to the water company there, the townships, I said, hey, when you're talking to the gas companies, could you get them to decide on which roads they use to come in and which roads they use to go out? Right? To keep them away from the water supplies and where we can keep them away from populated areas as much as possible. I also suggested that, well, if you're so concerned about natural gas, could we also be concerned about the home heating fuel truck and the sheets truck, right? Same issue. 1 gallon of gas contaminates 1 million gallons of fresh water. All right? In its best day, 1 gallon of brine water contaminates about 10,000 gallons. Still bad. But again, you're not paying right attention. But you can do things like that with source water protection, where you can work with your authority and establish source water protection zones. Typically, it's easier to do that when there's an authority or a water company, because it's easier to do source water protection because it's actually funded through that program.
You
Yes,
said to be a well driller, like you could be 25
$25.
bucks.
No training.
Right. Now, there are states, New Jersey, I think.
Oh, there are counties in Pennsylvania where you actually have to take a test. Now, when the reason why I don't do a lot of drilling, I've maybe drilled 100 feet. Most of the guys that I hire drill for me, I do certain things so I can say to them. Like I drilled 100 feet and the guy threw me off. I do, the whole point of that is you don't want me drilling your well. You want somebody that's been had training on how to do it. And typically, the one association belonging to the National Groundwater Association, they have a program where they certify drillers. So that if you're having a private well work, you want somebody that's certified by National Groundwater Association. If you're doing water treatment work, you want somebody certified by WQA, Water Quality Association. Not just the plumber down the road.
See,
Yeah, that way.
because I know Senator Yaw.
Sure, yes, very nice.
Yeah.
Well, he's big help for me. One of the things that count, and I feed him information like I feed every other senator that, my community, stuff. I'm not a guy.
That's an issue he was
Yes.
looking at.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, say states or places where they do have all these rules and regulations, the cost of drilling a well.
It goes up. The problem is, it's things that we don't understand and don't see. And let me put it in this perspective. If you were given the following two options, being full disclosure, hey, we're going to drill your well, but it's going to cost you $1,000 more. Or you're going to drill your new well, you got 1 tons of water, and 3 years from now, you're going to walk in and say, hey, you know what, you're going to have to put a $2,000 water treatment system in. And then it's going to cost you $300 a year or $200 a year for the rest of your life. Wouldn't you want to at least have that decision? And so that's why I have it where I'm okay with the statewide, but I really would prefer a local. Because at least on the local level, you can decide what you want as a local community and say, we want private well construction standards. Here's a model ordinance to get it done. And by the way, this is what we want, rather than waiting for the state to come down. And there's actually, the legislators are kind of balanced on this. There's some that want it to come from a grassroots level up.
That's
Right.
why they were to Farm Bureau, because
Yes.
Farm Bureau is a grassroots.
Right,
and
grassroots
we
level up on
developed a
that.
policy.
Develop a policy guideline on it and bring it from the township level up, rather than bringing it down from the state, so it doesn't seem, because what happens when you bring it down from the state, the ordinance becomes long-winded. It has to include every variation in the state, and then you get down to things that are stupid where I had one township ordinance that wanted them to go out there and measure the thickness of the steel casing that was being used with a micrometer. I'm like, okay, now I gotta get a guy that's trained in using a micrometer. I would just be in there and watch the guy drilling, putting the cement in. He's not there in the key, he was out there measuring the casing, but he wasn't there when it was supposedly cemented. Putting the cement down, and that's the most important thing. So that's why I like the idea, and I use that word a lot, working as a community. I think you guys can get together and come out, what you guys are happy with. Bring it at your level, bottom up. I'm involved in the Carbon County Groundwater Guardians. That's what our outreach is. Education, getting people to test their water. Private well construction standards, group out of Carbon County. I think I'm going to be taking that group over. We're probably going to go a little bit bigger. That's always been my message. rather than state, local, let's do what we need to do.
Well, I have to say Cabot has been to my farm 2, if not 3 times to take water, to send it away and be tested.
Great,
Prior to them twice before they ever came to drown.
right,
And they let the water run and run and run
great,
and
that's
run.
the way to sample,
And then the outside firm,
right.
Appalachia up in Halsted.
Oh, yeah, he has a nice little, website with, some GIS on it.
And, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
they were there
Yeah.
quite a while.
Oh, good.
And they let the water, and I was able to have the ponds tested,
That's important.
everything.
Yeah, and keep that data. The one thing that we found, which was sad in working in the citizen database, is that people that, on average, the people that got water quality data that they didn't pay for, half of them can't find it. Yeah, if somebody came in their house, collected it for them, and then gave them this thick report, we found that half of them couldn't find the report at all, and we found that over half didn't even bother looking at it, because they didn't understand it. Period. Hey, is everything all right? Yes. Okay. Because the report was like this thick. So that's why, one of the things when we started hearing that, we said, okay, well, we're gonna come out with a booklet that describes that, we're gonna make sure there's content up, so if people wanna know those things or need help with it, they can go to someone and
Okay, so there's no layman's version to that?
No, and that's what I do, and nobody pays me for that, by the way, but I'd like to do that. I did that for 23 years at Wilkes, and when I left there, I said, I kinda like that too much, to give that up. Yes?
Once you have the baseline testing done, how often do you recommend retesting it? Because otherwise, when would you know if there was a change or a problem in the water?
Yeah, that's a tough issue. Well, usually what I would recommend is, EPA recommends at least an annual water test. That's the minimum recommendation, and what I would suggest is that, 2 things. 1, at least an annual water test, not for all the same parameters, but the things that were, flags. Hey, I didn't have any bacteria in my water, but the nitrate was approaching a drinking water standard. Hey, the iron was just below drinking water. Things that were issues for you. I would say though, if you did have methane in the water at like 2 milligrams per liter or more, I would probably do a sampling every quarter for the first year to try to pick up that variation. Because what might happen is, you may not know it, but the methane level might go up, and when that goes up, the iron and manganese may go up. Now, the other side of that argument is, well, that's not my problem. That's theirs. But hey, if that does happen because you live there, you know what happens to your water. That if that happens or not to your water. But that's kind of the argument that's coming out, is seeing the first year be more frequent. I have to say, I do like the New York approach that they have in their standard, which actually requires testing by the gas companies prior to drilling, 6 months, a year, 2 years, and then you could call. I like that. It puts that burden off of you a little bit. Also, we do programs where one of the things I like doing is I have a program where I teach you guys how to monitor your own water. So when you have a meeting, once a month, you bring your water sample in, and we check it with a connectivity meter, and we check for certain things and say, hey, everything looks good. Or we do the informational water testing, where you can actually have a kit mailed to your house, collect a sample, mail it back to a certified lab. Not something you can take to court, but the price point's really low for
That's
that.
like Northeast Environmental Consultants down in Scranton.
You
That's
could
where
do
I get
that.
mine.
Yeah,
Every 2 years I have mine
Yep,
tested.
you
just
can
to
do
make
that,
sure.
yep. And
It's only $25.
They're now Microbac, yeah.
Yeah.
Microbac bought them out. I know John. He
They're
sold
still
them.
there?
Yes,
They-
Microbac bought that
they
lab
should.
out.
Okay.
So they're owned by.
But they don't do a heavily concentrated.
No, that's why I wanted, yeah, so what we did is we actually have a partnership with a nationally certified lab that does a screening test.
Mhm.
Runs about anywhere from $100 to $150. Certified, it'd be anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500.
Right.
And again, it's a red flag kind of thing.
So did you say you would come back here for another meeting?
I love coming out and talking to people.
Well,
I bet anything you want, happy to do that. Sorry,
well,
I'm
so
from Swan. I need a clock. That's what I need. I need a clock.
You want to know what time it is? It's about 8:15.
Okay, good.
But, this is
And I'm
strictly
happy,
volunteer
Sure.
group, it's open to the public. You know, most of the people are landowners here in Brooklyn Township. That was kind of the object of it when I kind of started the ball rolling. But other people are welcome if they're here to learn
yeah,
and to, you know, ask questions. So if we were to have another meeting
sure.
and make all the people aware,
Yeah.
because we've had over 60 people.
Yeah,
since
and the other
meeting.
thing too is I'm more than happy to say, hey, you know, again, I didn't know what you guys were looking for, so I put this up. You know, you can say, hey, we really want to know about this. You know, we were reading some articles about this. You know, I'm a big fat guy. You know, I mean, I'm not. You know, I kind of like it when I leave a room and both sides are like pissed off in some respect. You know, I like that. No, I like that. I like when both sides are mad. You know? I did a presentation. I think my presentation was in Dimick. And in my presentation in Dimick, I was going through all the things that gas companies need to do on their drilling sites, and I could just see George in the back going, oh. But that's important because, you know, I don't know if they're doing those things, and it turned out most of the things they were being done or they were implemented, which is cool. Because a lot of other companies weren't doing that. But I like that, because we have to have change, and we can always improve. And the other thing is, I get a lot of heat for this statement. There are some gas companies that are ahead of the curve. They're doing things, you know, beyond the regulatory requirement. And they go, well, wait a second, you know, what do you mean they're ahead of the curve? Well, because, you know, the regulations require this, and they're doing this. Then that might be the future regulations. You know, it's some of these small companies that are doing things really just bare bones. You know, and the other companies are switching over to doing, hey, air drilling, no water, completely self-contained pads. You know, there's no requirement for that. You know, that way.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Thank you. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just related to that, I read a lot on water. We all worry about what we're drinking. What's your opinion on what we're showering and bathing in, especially with kids, and exposure externally, especially to warm water above room temperature? Should there be a concern if you've got some problem in your water about the bathing and the
Well, I think what
shower?
happened, I was talking to some people down in the southwestern PA, a group of physicians, and you know, they have an approach with, where they look at things kind of like on a health-based exposure limit. The difficulty is that for applying that to private wells, it's hard because you're trying to apply something that, first of all, isn't regulated at all. The closest thing that we have to a regulation for private wells is the drinking water standard that doesn't even apply. Okay? So my hope, I was actually at an industry meeting, and they were like, well, what standard should we apply to private wells? And I said, well, in my opinion, they should meet drinking water standards. Well, they're not regulated by EPA, they're not covered by the Clean Water Act. What do you mean, why should that be the standard? Well, because that is the standard. And the next one is, beyond that, would be advisory limits or standards that have been set for other states. So for example, if we don't have a standard in Pennsylvania for glycols, which we don't, but 4 other states have a standard for glycols, maybe we should consider using one of those. The problem is how to use that and apply that here. Because if you use it and apply that here, it becomes difficult because now you're almost testing law that hasn't been done. I try to apply that in the book. So in the book, where we have elements that are issues related to natural gas, like lithium, glycols, that don't have a standard in Pennsylvania, if I could find one, I have it in there. So that can be used as a guide. But that's what I'd look. I'd look at the EPA advisories. EPA publishes that every year. There's a 2012 publication done. They are health-based. I think they're also age-based. And then other states. That's how I would use it. The problem is getting our state law to use that as the standard for private wells, because that standard actually exceeds the standard for the water for the regulated town in some cases. It might make sense, but I can imagine it'd be extremely difficult for the court to assess that. Where individuals can make that decision is putting in barriers. I don't sell water treatment stuff, but that could be where you say, hey, you know, your water meets the drinking water standard. That's not good enough for me. I'm not happy with having any VOCs in my water. period. You know, even though the standard is I can have this much, I don't want any. You know, I have a cancer patient, she doesn't want anything in her water. Nothing. You know, we had multiple the well driller I work with, Crestwell, arsenic treatment, VOCs, filters, nothing. That's her choice. Which is also kind of in the book, that idea of, you know, you can look at this as a standard, but and here's the route of impact. You can make a choice and put a filter on it. I worked a case that was like, where a woman, water treatment specialist came in and hard sold her a water treatment system, right? It did these tests that said, oh wow, you have lots of lead in your water. Can't test that in the field. He did a hardness test. He's, oh, look at all the lead. You're going to need to put a reverse osmosis treatment system in, right? But when he wrote it up for her, he has a little note there. He goes, this is only needed for aesthetic reasons. He wrote that next to it, after he hard sold it. So there are things that are set for your aesthetic purposes, for your personal decisions. Right now, I think there's probably difficulty in Pennsylvania law to get that applied to your water. And you don't want to drink water with nothing in it. It's not very good. Anything else? Well, thanks. I had
Well, I think that's been the frustrating thing about having water tested, not knowing. A guy said he'll do it for $300, another guy says he'll do it for $800, or we'll give you a $300 test or an $800 test. Now, we want to know what we need for our particular situation.
Right, and that's in part that now the other thing is I do train people that do baseline testing. I have a trip planned for Ohio where people that do go out and do baseline testing, I go through how they should collect, and I try to teach them that discussion. You know, that one-on-one, no offense, I do that for lots of reasons. One, you know, it makes it easier in many respects to sell you something else. But you might need it. You know, if I look at you and say, you know what, this is what you have. You really need to spend that dollar figure on this, and this is why. You know, but again, I have worked with people that say, I only have $300 to spend, or $200. That's it, no more. What can I get done? And what's going on in your house? You know, this is what you can get done, but this is the best bang for that dollar. And can you spend $1,000? Sure. If you actually for my full recommendation on baseline testing, you can go to $4,000 or $5,000. Why do I have the $4,000 and $5,000 one there? It's because I told you about it. Most of my customers that do that test are water companies who are looking for the really extreme, or SOCs and things like that in the water. Very rare issue. If you look in the book on how I have baseline testing set up, I look at it from a different perspective. What are going to be the most likely problems? That's the cheapest kit, option 1, tier 1, whatever you want to call it. You know, tier 2 is the next. And then we supplement that by what's going on near your house or your personal illness. You know, for example, if you have lots of gastrointestinal problems, cancer, you know, I'm going to say, you know, for gastrointestinal, I'll say, hey, we really should check the copper and lead level of your water, because that can really screw that up. So that's part of that discussion. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, folks, it's always been your decision about another meeting. Now, we have been trying to meet like on a Wednesday night, once a month here. It is winter time. I know when I got up this morning and seen all the snow, and I am a chicken, a big one when it comes to bad roads. I thought, you know what, these roads don't look better by tonight. I'll be calling Richard Sick, or Morgan Turner, or some of the other guys that have volunteered to help and wanted to see this thing continued and say, okay guys, I'm not gonna be there, but the road's cleared up. So, what are your thoughts for another meeting? What an issue or what subject would you like to see addressed? Want to pursue the water issue further?
Whatever you guys want.
I know that we usually have so many more people than this, and there were a lot of people who would have been interested to be here tonight, one of my neighbors. And with the winter, it's gonna be
That's, and you never know, what kind of weather roads it's going to be.
But I'd like to see him come again, maybe in better weather.
Robin suggested, another meeting, but maybe wait another month or two until the weather might be more favorable.
Like April, like,
Pardon? Can't afford the heat. Our township supervisors have been very, very generous here to,
I think it's saying it's too hot, right?
they even went looking for more chairs at one point in time because, how many water buffaloes would be sitting here to to supply that much water. But, if you think you would like to do a tour, I can talk to my two sons. I'm sure they would not have a problem. They're not ones to get up in front of people and speak their piece, but I am, and it's my farm. And just like when they've seen cars stopped up there, really wanting to go on the property, they went up and said, "This is private property, keep moving." And that's just how they handled it. But everything has been very, very positive. And if you think you would like to do some kind of a bus tour, we'll see what we can do.
Would we be allowed on our pad that was
If Cabot comes with us, you can go on the pads. The guy who was here.
I'm talking about one that's being built at the time to see.
Oh, yeah.
One that's being
That's
built.
what I-
Ours is all
Oh,
done.
yeah, I've been on a bunch of them.
Gas
Yeah,
is
Bill-
going
Cabot
into the
does-
pipeline,
yeah,
they're all
Cabot does
done
a lot of
at my place.
Yeah, the most boring thing is being on a hydro-frac job. That's boring. It's like,
Well, we might be able to see from the initial construction, the well site, clear through and maybe including the compressor station. The compressor station seems to get a lot of, water.
Thanks, Robin and June.
we gotta clean it, dip.
Thanks.
Up in there.
Might want to send a questionnaire out to, see how many would be interested. Or something like a Saturday afternoon,